Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Meredith Phillips. I'm a writer, reader, and bunny mama. Apologies in advance if my nose looks a little red and I sound a little congested. My allergies have been a disaster today, so we're gonna try to get this done without sneezing 10,000 times. I'll make sure to cut those out so you don't have to listen to that. But today I wanted to talk about lessons I learned from writing my first book. I started writing in April of 2016 and I was super enthusiastic about this original book idea I had. I wrote it, I was super excited about it, and it's a disaster, but I've learned a lot from that first time writing, that first experience writing, and I'd like to share some of the lessons that I learned from that experience. So if you're a new writer, this might be particularly helpful. If you've been writing for a long time, then I guess it's not helpful at all. Because it's not really for you. So just a quick recap. I know I've talked about this a few times in previous videos, but in my first writing attempt, which was April 2016, I had an idea literally on April 1st, and by April 4th, just a few days later, I was starting a first draft of it. And I pantsed the entire thing. I spent 6 weeks writing super intensely. I had like 110,000 words by the end of that 6-week period. Here is my very first effort at writing. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't know what to title it, but I did do a title page. Yeah, that's what I named it, because I'm terrible at titles, by the way. Still haven't learned how to do that. And my first lesson that I learned is that pantsing a novel is incredibly fun. But the second lesson is that pantsing a novel, at least for me, creates an enormous mess. I know some people are pantsers and they can do that and it somehow still comes out to be decent enough where they can go back and revise it. That is not the case for me. As much as I wish that were the case, because pantsing again is a lot of fun, it just doesn't work. I end up with an enormous disaster of a mass of words on my hands. The third lesson I learned was that I knew nothing, and I mean nothing, about story structure. So that contributed to the disaster I had going on in this manuscript. I didn't know anything about story structure. I didn't know about when the inciting incident should be happening. I didn't know what the midpoint was supposed to involve. I didn't know any of those things. And not knowing that kind of really basic writing principle made my work a huge mess. But the fourth thing that I learned is that even if your first effort or your first efforts are messy and don't make sense and the characters are weak and the plot is all over the place, it doesn't matter. If you had a good time doing it and you finished a manuscript, you can still be proud of that effort. That first manuscript I created, I would never share it with anyone. It's pretty worthless in terms of being a good story. But when I think back to where I was as a writer, I mean, I was a teeny baby writer. I didn't know anything. The fact that I had a great time doing this project and I finished the project is still something to be proud of. I'm still really proud of that effort that I sat down for weeks on end and wrote this whole big thing. It was just the beginning of my writing journey, but it's such a key component to that journey that it's still something I'm proud of, even though I would never share it or do anything further with it. The fifth thing that I learned writing my first book was that you should start with a simple story. If you're a beginning writer, I think my best piece of advice would be to start with something that is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. This first thing that I started with, this manuscript that I was so excited about and this idea I was so excited about, I think it was a cool idea, but the way I conceived of it in my head was this high fantasy, lots of world building, multiple POV storyline, which is incredibly difficult to craft that even for experienced authors. So to have that be the first thing I was trying to start with, it was like setting myself up for failure. High fantasy takes a lot of work in terms of the world building. If you have multiple POVs in a story, that also takes a special kind of skill. It was kind of like trying to jump to level 10 before I'd even taken the step up to level 1. So it just wasn't the best place to start. The sixth thing I learned from writing my first book was that world building is really difficult. And I don't really like it that much. Some people can get really into world building and they've got notebooks upon notebooks with notes on the characters, the notes on the types of peoples or culture groups. They've got languages they've created. They have a whole economic system set up, a whole government set up, and they really can get into all those kinds of details and they have fun creating those worlds. I don't really have that much fun doing it because to me there are so many different avenues you can go down. If you choose that your world is going to be ruled by a king, then you're going to go off down this direction. But maybe you backtrack and you're like, wait, maybe it should be ruled by a president who's elected, and then you're going to go off this way. And there's like branches off of all of those different options, and if you choose one thing it's going to affect something else, and just like the whole map of creating a society is incredibly difficult. And I would get way too bogged down in the details of that and trying to figure out how this type of economic principle in the society was going to affect this kind of social thing, and I just didn't care that much. It was way too much for me, and to have that be the first thing I was trying to do, it was a lot. The seventh thing that I learned in writing my first book was that cliches are cliches for a reason. And especially if you're a first-time writer or fairly new to writing, you are not going to make cliches new and fun. They're cliches. So don't try to think that you're going to reinvent them into some amazing thing. You probably are not going to do that. So try not to use cliches because they're just going to end up as cliches in your novel. The next thing I learned in writing my first book was that book writing is hard. It's very difficult. And after I finished it, I realized why it was that most people never end up finishing a book. It takes a lot of hours. It takes a lot of mental effort. When you get to the end of the process of writing, you're finished with the draft, but you're not really finished with the project. If you want to keep it going and really do something with it, you're gonna of course have to go back and revise it again and edit it and do a whole lot of work to get to a point where it's in a more finished, more complete version of itself. So finishing that first draft is really just the first step, and the whole process is very difficult. But having said that, the next thing I learned is that writing is so much fun. I found, especially in that first book, that writing was a little bit for me like journaling. It could be anything I wanted it to be. If I want to scribble on the page of my journal, I can. If I wanted to write a one-off scene that really didn't fit within the rest of the story, I could do that. It didn't matter because it was only for me. I strongly believe that your first draft, especially if you've first started writing, that first draft you do should be for yourself. Don't feel pressure like you have to share it with someone or give it to somebody for a critique or something like that. Don't do that to yourself. Just enjoy writing it because writing is a joy. The last thing I learned that was super important from that first experience in writing my first novel was that research is key if you want to become a better writer. I went into that first draft, again, I didn't know anything. I'd read books, but I'd never read a book about writing, and it showed. So definitely take some time to read craft books. There's a ton of different options for craft books out there. Some people like some better than others. Read some reviews, get a few, learn about story structure, learn about character arcs, learn about those basic building blocks that are really going to give your story a solid foundation. And the other thing I would kind of tag on to that is to make sure you are reading in the genre that you are trying to write in. So if you're writing fantasy, you'd better be reading or have read multiple fantasies before. If you're writing a mystery novel, you need to have read mysteries or currently be reading a mystery. Now I know some people, if you're writing in a certain genre, they don't like to then read a book in that genre at the same time they're trying to write in it, just because then they feel like their voice is going to be taken over by the author's voice of the book they're reading and things like that. So that I get, but you should read and know that genre if you're trying to write in it. The reason that that is important is because different genres have different genre expectations from the reader. So if you are writing a mystery or a thriller, people who love those kinds of books are going to be expecting certain elements to appear within your book. That's why they're reading it. They want those specific things. So for example, I read and write romance novels. I read other stuff too, but I enjoy romance novels, and I have certain expectations going into those books. There are certain types of scenes I'm expecting or certain events events that need to happen within the novel for me to be satisfied as a reader. So if I get to the end of the book and nobody's said that they love the other person yet, that's a fail. And if those things don't happen, then why am I reading this? Like, that's what I want to read. So you as the writer need to give that to me. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to purchase another one of your books because I was disappointed in the one I did read. So those are the big lessons I learned from writing my first book. I know some of you might have been writing already for a really long time. If you have lessons learned from your first book or from your very early writing experiences, let us know about those in the comments below. If you yourself are a first-time writer or a very new writer, let us know the types of things that you are learning as you're beginning the process of being a writer. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. I post videos on Tuesdays and Fridays. You can also find me over on Instagram at Meredith Phillips Writes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye. Okay, looking great. Looking great. It's really bad. It's really bad.